Who's that peeping in my window? Plow. Nobody now. Who's that peeping in my window? Plow. Nobody now. Remember that joint? Yo, word is born. Once again, we're here at Where My Killer Tape At, episode number 64, a special two-parter for you. We're gonna deviate from how we normally get down. So we're gonna be talking about conspiracy theories in both of these episodes. This one is gonna be me talking about, how long conspiracy theories been around, how I got into them, how I got out of them. And episode 2, which will be episode 65, we're gonna have a special guest. So definitely check it out. A 1 2, a 1 2, a 1 2, a 1 2. I like to introduce myself. I like to introduce myself.
Now greetings to the world.
Yo. For episode 64 of Where My Killer Tape At, I'm sipping on hot toddy-ish. Toddy-ish. You ever had a hot toddy? Well, hot toddy-ish. And this is put together by Evil Twin Brewing. Really dope. They make some dope stuff. And it's a blonde barley wine style ale. Let me just say this. This is probably one of the most unusual things I ever drank, next to a peanut butter jelly stout, because I can taste the barley wine, the ale, and then it's almost like a Merlot at the end. It's unusual, but I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. Word is born. I enjoy it. Shout out to Evil Twin, and they not paying me for this. But this is hot toddy-ish. I like that. I think it'll be a good idea to give a working definition of a conspiracy theory. I found one on Merriam-Webster.com. Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And what they're saying is it a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances that are a result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators, right? I don't really like using conspiracy theory as a term for that, right? I don't like the way they use theory in there, right? Because I know a lot of times, and I know I'm being elitist right now, right? Because I see people that'll say, well, my theory is, and I'm like, actually, that's not a theory, that's just an opinion. Because the same, dictionary will say that a theory is a plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles offered to explain phenomena, right? I know that they throw in a definition of belief or whatever, but it's not. And I think what a lot of people might want to say is I have a hypothesis, or I have an opinion. But to say conspiracy theory means that it's scientifically acceptable. That's what we believe to have happened. And yes, history has processes that are scientific. We do have, we have fossil records, right? We have archaeology, right? We have photographs, we have pictures, we have primary documents, discussions and interviews with people that were there. So there's a scientific process into how we prove that certain things happen. But but a conspiracy theory does not. So that's why I don't like using that term. And every time I let people slide with it, because when somebody says conspiracy theory, they know what it means. But it's not a conspiracy theory. And also, shout out to T with Q and J with this one. But a conspiracy implies that it's secret, right? Conspiracy is a secret plot, right? So to say that it's a conspiracy and you know about it, and a lot of people know about it, means it's not a conspiracy. Have there been conspiracies throughout history? Yes, there have been many, right? Tuskegee experiment is probably the best one to know that we all know of, right? Some of the eugenics that were done on people in Puerto Rico in the 60s, that was secret, nobody was talking about it, right? And later on it was revealed, right? We could talk about Deep Throat. We can talk about all those things that happened that they were later revealed, so they can no longer be considered conspiracy. So, and I know people are going to say, oh, you're dealing with semantics, etc., etc., but personally, all across the board, I feel like the term theory is actually misused. Word. The first time I encountered a conspiracy theory, it was in 1989, and I remember I was talking to this young lady, and she was a socialist. I didn't know she was a socialist at the time, but I remember she invited me to like this rally they had at St. Anne's Church in the Bronx. So I went, and I learned a lot. It was, again, at the time, I never actually met a socialist until that period. I knew about socialism through what I was taught at school when they were teaching me liberation theology. So I knew a little bit about it, but I actually never met anybody who was a socialist. So again, it's before the internet. So I went, and there was a bunch of cool people over there. We was hanging out, and smoking trees or whatever. And then I remember seeing this one dude. He had a table, and he wasn't part of any organization, but he had these he Xerox or printed out these copies, and he had them stapled about how they were going to implant these chips into us, right? And these chips would be able to, track us down. This is back in '89 now. That they put it under your skin. They were saying that some people were saying they were putting it behind your, in the back of your neck, or they were putting it in the top of your hand. And they could identify you, who you are. They could track you around the world. It had your medical records on there, all that stuff. And they said it was from Revelation in the Bible. They said that it was the mark of the devil, 6666, right? 666, right? 666, right? I'm not a mathematician, so bear with me. So that's what they were telling us, and it was like, be careful because it's coming. They're gonna put it into us. Sometimes we're gonna know they're gonna do it to us. Some of us are gonna do it voluntarily, and if you don't do it, they're gonna either throw you in jail or they're gonna execute you. So that's like the first time I heard that. I remember I had this it was like 4 pages front and back, black and white, and I remember I read it, just tore it up, just tore into it, and I was like, man, and that's when I was like, I caught the conspiracy theory bug. And every time somebody would come to me and they would give me that, they would be like, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm down for that. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that later, about what happens once you get caught up in that. Word. So where does conspiracy theories come from? Like when did they first begin? Now, we're going to say, that conspiracy theories have been around as long as we've been around, right? Conspiracy theories sometimes are known as urban myths, just things that people believe that may have started off as a rumor or a misconception, or I like to call it the telephone. We should do the circle, the talking circle, where I would tell someone something, and then they have to tell this exact same story to the person next to them. By the time it comes all the way back around to me, it sounds completely and totally different. And that happens too, especially, before a time when we had mass communication, where everything was word of mouth. So a lot of times things came down to people, and a lot of things were changed, embellished, and all that stuff, right? I mean, I've heard stories about people in my neighborhood, things that I've witnessed, and then when I've heard a story told by somebody who was much younger than me, it sounds completely different, and I'm always like, hey, that's not what happened. So that's usually how they usually start. A lot of it is because, humans are also paranoid, particularly those that want to oppress other people, right? Or they feel like they're being wrong, right? They want to feel like they're in control, they have any power, and they want to feel like they know something, and the masses don't, right? The masses are stupid and they don't know what's going on. And that's the stuff that I hear from a lot of conspiracy theories. But this is even before the internet, because I was listening to conspiracy theories since I was a little boy. So I'm 46, so they've been around for a long time. But I can give you some points in history where we have some conspiracy theories that people use, right? Most notably, there's one that most people don't know about, and it's probably like one of my favorites. And the reason why it's one of my favorites is because I want to say it's more an urban myth than a conspiracy theory, but it ended up being used as a way to push policy. Particularly foreign policy, particularly that of imperialistic policy. And that's the story of Prester John. Prester John was like a priest king that a lot of European Christians, particularly the Catholic Church and the popes was this person that they thought actually existed, and they thought that he was someone in the East that could be an ally during the Crusades. That was the first time that was back in the, I think it was like the 13th century, I believe. I could be wrong on the centuries, but it was used in the 13th century and then used over and over, even up until colonial times, right? Anyway, a lot of popes believe that when they go into these crusades over in the Middle East, that there was a Christian king, and I know his name was probably not Prester John, but it's something that they was made up and used as propaganda to convince people, and and get people to fight on the side of Christendom. And remember, this is before the internet, so you had to convince people to get up, travel thousands of miles to foreign lands that are completely hostile to them, and fight and try to take over the Holy Land, right? Like, you got to do that. So one way of convincing people is saying, hey, there's this guy named Prester John, and definitely we can ally ourselves with him, and he will make it safe for us. So we just got to find him. Of course, there were people that later claimed to be Prester John. I know one time Marco Polo, when he went out to China, he was told to look for Prester John, and he was like, hey, there's nobody out here named Prester John. Because they believed that even as far out as China, there was some kind of king who was either a Christian or like had Christian ideals or was ready to be converted. And they thought they could use him as someone to gain political leverage in China. So again, that was a hoax as well. Later on, Prester John was used by Europeans when they invaded Africa. And they were saying that there was some in the East, there's some African king who was either once again Christian or had Christian ideals or was ready to be converted, and they thought that they could use him as an ally. He was an idea that was used to help promote, colonialism and later slavery, right? So again, it's a conspiracy theory. No one's ever like found this guy. He was never, it was just something that was just made up. What were there Christian kings in those areas? Yes, there were. But that was after colonialism. That's after all those things. And Christianity was used as a tool to enslave and subjugate other peoples. So that's one person that I can remember, or one idea that I consider a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. I think Chris should run first on this one. I think Chris should run first on this one.
Another conspiracy theory that been around for a while, actually started in the 19th century, and people still read this book today, is a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. During the late 19th century and most of the 20th century, really up until World War II, they had these things called pogroms, and it was literally, they took Jewish people and they lynched them in the street. That's really pretty much what it was. It was just they just did it randomly, right? And they were called pogroms. And but one of the things that came around that kind of like fomented it and made it kind of like policy, because a lot of times, local governments didn't prosecute anyone who hurt or maimed or killed Jewish people in Europe, right? So there was a big anti-Jewish sentiment in Europe at that time, and a lot of people that were leaders, and actually I know Henry Ford, who started the Ford Motor Company here in the United States, he read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and he was just like, yeah, this is what I mean, Jewish people are crazy, right? And that's what the stuff he was doing, because there was a lot of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic sentiment in the United States and in Europe, right? And in a lot of places, in most of Europe, Jewish people were put in what actually where the term ghettos come from, because those places where Jewish people live. And everything that we think about when we say ghettos in a negative way, it comes from this terminology used to describe neighborhoods that Jewish people were segregated into. So this is a book, and the author is still unknown to this day. It was like really a pamphlet. It's not that long. I've read it. I actually owned the copy, right? Because I was on that bullshit at one time. But it was written sometime in the late 19th century, and a lot of politicians, a lot of clergy, a lot of business people read it and was like, hey, this is a book you got to read. You got to read this book. You got to read this book. But it's about a conspiracy theory of Jewish people to take over the world. And they were saying this is why we got to stop Jewish people, because they're scheming and conniving. None of it is based on scientific fact. None of it is based on any historical data. None of it is based on any of that stuff. But people believed it. People thought it was true. Even though the authors were unknown, they really did. And you could probably still purchase the Protocols of Elders of Zion on Amazon. I haven't seen it in the bookstore in a while, but I remember seeing it in bookstores. Like I bought it from an actual bookstore. So that's one conspiracy theory that was used to push public policy. And some of it was used by the Nazis in Germany to say, hey, look, this is why we got to exterminate the Jews. So that's why in several ways conspiracy theories can be very dangerous, because in many cases, like, when we talked about Prester John, it actually was used to push public policy, and that in of itself is dangerous. Man, in the 90s, woo, what? If you listen to hip hop music in the 90s, everybody talked about the New World Order. NWO, the Illuminati, black helicopters, the microchip under the skin, the mark of the beast, 666. Like, everybody was doing it. I was hardcore into it. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, even Busta Rhymes, who was like getting mainstream at the time. If you got his albums back then, in the beginning of his albums, in the intro, he would always talk about how, oh, there's only 6 years left. There's only 4 years left. Well, we all felt like in the year 2000, the New World Order was going to take over. The Illuminati would take over the government, and it'll be one world government, and we'll have slavery and concentration camps and black helicopters and wild shit. In the beginning of this episode, I sang a song, who's that peeping in my window? That's by, Goody Mob from the South. CeeLo was a member of that group, and they had a song that dealt with the New World Order. Really, that most of the album they talked about it, and in that song they talked about the microchip and black helicopters and all kinds of shit. Even in the video they show it. So a lot of hip hop music was steeped back then in what we call the New World Order, conspiracy theory. Anyway, there were 2 books that like all of us read. Like if you was a conspiracy theory nut, these are the 2 books that you read. The first one was The New World Order by this guy named Ralph Epperson. And he pretty much talked about how the Illuminati has been controlling everything, in the United States, and helped push World War I and World War II, and how they were going to push for a new world government, one world government, and just take over the world. And they had like this guy who was like the child of Satan named Maitreya. And it was like, this person is alive. He's going to be in charge of this one world government. And that's what he was kicking. The second book was one, and the New World Order, like I haven't seen anybody talk about that book in a long time. I don't know what happened. I should research to see. I mean, you can still purchase it, but I don't see people talk about it as much as this next book, which was written in 1991. And I got a funny story about that. And it's Behold the Pale Horse. Yes, it's named after the song by Milton William Cooper, or William Cooper. Some people call him Bill Cooper. And he was killed by some sheriff deputies. We're gonna talk about that some other time though. But that book, that book, which everybody talks about to this day. They still talk about Behold the Pale Horse. I see people talk about it, refer to it consistently. In that book, Milton Cooper, why don't you say Cooper? He actually talks about different conspiracy theories, right? Like how the Pope John Paul II sold Zyklon B gas to the Nazis. Like how the Kennedy assassination was an inside job, how there are aliens that we've met, and President Forrestal, was the President Forrestal, Secretary of State Forrestal under Kennedy actually met the aliens, and that's why he went to an asylum. He has different ideas that from different conspiracy theories that he put in one book. So like if there's any book that's kind of like, that covers all of them or most of them or a great number of them, it's that one, Behold the Pale Horse. But those are the 2 that we all read. Matter of fact, Goody Mob, their first album, Soul Food, was just steeped in the stuff that Cooper talked about in his book. But we all referred to it. We all talked about it. It's just those 2 books I remember being influential that we passed around and just consistently talked about in the barbershop and in ciphers.
Yes.
The name of the game is Lightworks. Night of the Slips. The name of the game is Lightworks.
So now I gotta tell you my Behold the Pale Horse story. So anyway, I got booked to speak at the University of Buffalo a couple of years back with some notable activists. And then after we were done, Everybody met at the frat house that was kind of like sponsoring us. I can't remember the name of the fraternity. It was a Latino fraternity, and they had invited us over to their spot. Because my thing was when I get booked for a gig, if y'all ever do, I usually prefer a home cooked meal versus like going out to a restaurant to eat. It's more communal and all that, and the food is much better. So I went, had a wonderful time. We were having a discussion in the living room. It was about 20 of us in the living room, and I remember there was this poet that was there. I can't remember his name though, because we stayed in contact for a while during the MySpace days, and then like when everybody transferred from MySpace to Facebook, we lost contact. Anyway, we were talking, and he says, "Yo, you got that book, Behold the Pale Horse?" I said, "Yeah, I got it." And at that time, I was kind of like slowly moving away from conspiracy theories. Like I was like really like slowly just tearing myself away from there little by little. And I was like, "Yeah, I got it." And mind you, that was a book that I referenced consistently. And at that point, it was a while since I opened it up. And he was like, "Yo, I got that book." He said, "But somebody stole it." So when somebody tells me a book got stolen, because a lot of my books get stolen all the time. And what I mean by stolen, I mean like I let somebody borrow it and then never return it. To me, that's stealing. I don't give a fuck what you say. That's stealing, right? So I'm thinking that's what happened, right? So I said, "Oh, word for real?" He was like, "No, you're not hearing me out." He said, if somebody stole it, somebody broke into my house and stole it from my bookshelf. So of course I was like, "Well, how you know?" He said, "Well, if when I got home, my door was open, and then one day I was looking for the book and it was gone, and I never let nobody borrow it." So I was like, "Man, whatever, bro." And then he was like, "I bet you yours is not there. I bet you your copy's not there." So I was just like, "Man, you tripping." So of course, I came home, and I remember he told me that, and I looked, and I couldn't find my book. Now, don't get me wrong. People borrow my books all the time, and they don't return it. Hence, they get stolen, right? But usually the way it goes down is people come into my house, and they'll ask me a question about something, and I'll be like, "Oh, boom, boom, this book talks about it," and I let them hold it. Rarely does someone ask me straight out for a particular book. Usually it's just we're talking and a subject comes up and I do that. So at that point in time, no one asked me about like conspiracy theory or anything like that. So I was like, they couldn't have done that. That's not true. Like that's really, really not true. And so I was like looking for it, man. And I started tripping. I was like, "Man, maybe this motherfucker was telling the truth," right? But then what I realized, what happened was one time I was moving furniture, and lo and behold, I used Behold the Pale Horse as like a leveler. I used it to level a piece of furniture, and that's why I couldn't find it. So yes, I still have the copy. I think if you want it, I give it away. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not that serious, So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And let me say this, man. Like I thought that like all this stuff was like just found in books that eventually like people stop fucking with it. But damn, you have people like Alex Jones who he caking off of this conspiracy theory stuff, right? And then you have like all these YouTube channels, B. Like, bruh, there's like hundreds of thousands of YouTube channels that deal with conspiracy theories, and they proliferate that information. And I know being an educator, a lot of my students ask me about conspiracy theories, and they ask, why isn't it not in the curriculum? And it's just like, because it's not true. But then again, like I said earlier, there's a lot of shit we teach that's just not true in history, right? So again, it's not a big leap, right? So it's crazy how it's just everywhere. Like, there was a time when only a few of us talked about it. And when I remember going to barbershops and people looking at me like I was crazy, which I was for believing in that stuff, right? But now it's like I'm the only one at the barbershop that be like, "Man, all y'all tripping on that shit. Why y'all talking about that? That's not true." And it's wild to see that, how just people just run with it, man. And I used to be that way. I used to watch a movie and be like, "Aha! See the Illuminati, you see?" And it's just crazy to see it happen all the time and people talking about it. And when you go home for Thanksgiving and all that stuff. So it's wild. Thank you, internet, right? Internet could be good or bad. It's a tool, right? Just like any other tool. So it's just wild to watch that at my age, to see that happen. Word. So why is it that we adhere to conspiracy theories so much? And that's a good question. And I'm not going to talk about this from a scientific standpoint. I'm going to talk about it from experience, right? When you come from a marginalized group of people, particularly when you live under white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, um, there are things that are done that are part of public policy that oppress us. You know what I mean? I mean, red line districts, police brutality, the prison industrial complex, the eugenics movement. I could go on and on about things that were either sanctioned by the government or allowed by the government, like they didn't have any laws that prosecuted people that had committed these crimes, um, or those people were just allowed to get away with it once they were found out. When you see these things happen on a consistent basis, every time you turn on the news, Dave Chappelle said it best, man. What's a black man without his paranoia? And that's pretty much what happens when it comes to us, right? It's just easy to assume that it's a conspiracy theory because for us it makes sense, right? So when you're talking about, like they'll say vaccinations causes autism, or they use to spread diseases like AIDS in other countries, right? When you look at that, but then you look at history and you look at the Tuskegee experiment, you look at the eugenics movement in the 1920s, when you look at eugenics being used on Puerto Ricans, right? When you look at all these things that are done, another example would be Pedro Albizu Campos, who was a Puerto Rican independista, and they used radiation treatments on him when he was in prison. Like, when you see these things happen, and then something, then somebody says something like, vaccines cause autism. It's not a far jump. It's not, I know I talked about this in the previous episode, in episode 63. It's just not a far jump. Like, it's really, for us, it's not a big leap to believe that, right? So again, it gives us a simple explanation as to why these things happen, right? But it also gives us a modicum of control, right? Because if we feel like we know something, we feel like we have some control over it, right? Especially when the mainstream, when most people don't believe that, right? So we'll be like, I know why. This is why you shouldn't drink the water, right? This is why you shouldn't get vaccinations, right? This is why you shouldn't, purchase things online, et cetera, right? And then there's some things that are really close to the truth, right? Like, we like to think that, the Illuminati is this secret organization that controls everything, but we do know that there are 82 families on the planet that, damn, I sound crazy, don't I? That they are the cause of the pollution on the planet, right? But that's not a conspiracy, right? It's not a secret. You can look that information up, right? You can find out which corporations are doing the most damage to the world, and then find out who owns those things. So that's not a conspiracy, and it's not an opinion. It's fact, right? But is that a far leap from believing that there's a small group that does it? No, it's not, right? It's not a far leap, right? They always talk about how the Bilderberg group is part of this. If you go to Behold the Pale Horse, he actually has like a thing you open up, and it actually tells you who's connected to who, right? And the Bilderberg group is in it. That's a family, actually. There's a Bilderberg group is a family, and they're worth I want to say $4 trillion. How do I know this? Because I have somebody at work that always brings this up to me, and I looked it up, and he was right. So I guess when you put those things together, it kind of makes this idea that maybe, William Cooper and Ralph Epperson are right. I know William Cooper is dead. I don't know about Ralph Epperson, so bear with me on that one. But it's that's why it is, right? So it's just easy to believe that when we're under white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So I get it, but also it gives us some idea of control when we think we know something like that is happening. How did I stop being a conspiracy theorist? I'm gonna just say this: it all began, I want to say, around 2005. And the thing is, I can't remember this dude's name, but there was this dude. I'm not saying he was from New York, but I remember the first time I seen him, he had a public access show in New York. Public access was, local governments. They have channels on local television where they have to allow private citizens to do shows, and they have standards, of course. You can't say regular FCC standards. You can't cuss, you can't show nudity, stuff like that. But they had people that had church, in their public access. People just have variety shows, talent shows. People had, they're really cool because people were able to do videos of like local things that were happening, restaurants, businesses, and some of them were conspiracy theories. And there was this one guy he was a very well-known conspiracy theorist back then. I can't remember his name. I tried looking him up. And I remember he even had a vinyl record where he was like, oh, he had an album where he talked about that stuff. And I know one of my elders knew him really good. Anyway, I went to see him speak. And, his VHS tapes used to go around, circulate all over the place. And I went to see him speak. And I remember there was this guy in the crowd who was like, hey, how you know these things to be true? And he was really like checking them. And I could tell he was getting frustrated because he wasn't answering his questions. And the guy was like, you're not answering my questions. And he was getting flustered. So then he was like, you must be an agent. Are you a federal agent? And back then, there was this thing that a lot of conspiracy theorists would do. They would say, if you're a conspiracy theorist, they would say if you are a federal agent and someone asks if you're a federal agent, you have to, by law, let them know that you are a federal agent. So if you're a member of the FBI or CIA or whatever, and someone calls you out, you have to openly admit it. So the guy was like, I am no agent. I just don't get it. I don't get what y'all be doing. It was, I'm paraphrasing, and he's like, oh, you must be a federal agent. And I noticed that everybody else was like, yeah, you're a federal agent. You a federal agent. Even I was like, yeah, man, you a federal agent, man. Yeah, man, get out of here, man. But he raised a lot of questions that stuck in my head. Like, how do you know this to be true? How do you know, how do you explain this? And this is after 911. So back then, everybody's talking about 911 and how it was an inside job. And the guy was asking some really pointed questions that was like, yo, that shit makes sense. Like, it makes it just makes sense. And then he talked about Occam's razor, and that really stuck with me. And even though I barked him down like everybody else, I noticed that the speaker didn't even answer his questions, and then just kind of embarrassed dude. Like, and then I started really like poking holes and stuff. And I remember listening to Alex Jones back then. Yes, I listened to Alex Jones back then. And I remember he had dude that did a video, Zeitgeist. What was that dude's name? Anyway, he did a video called Zeitgeist that was like really popular on the internet. It was like 2.5 hours long. And Alex Jones had him, and he questioned Alex Jones' stuff. And Alex Jones, you could probably find it online. Alex Jones was fucking nuts, yo. And I was just like, yo, Alex Jones be wilding. And that's when I really started peeping what he be saying. And I was just like, yo, I can't fuck with this. And I really stopped messing with those dudes. On top of that, a lot of our conspiracies come from either right-wing Christian nut jobs or right-wing racist motherfuckers. Because they believe the same shit. And let me be honest with you. I don't want to be aligned with them motherfuckers. I really don't, man. I'm, pro-black as they come. I don't align myself with right-wing racist motherfuckers, and I don't align myself with the Christian right. I don't. In any shape or form, I don't ever want to agree with them on shit. So that's just another thing that made me say, you know what, I can't do it. So, and I'm a skeptic, man. I'm just a skeptic at heart. So, like, some things that sound fishy, I'm like, man, it sound fishy, man. Word. Yo, first of all, I want to shout out the Barrel House, my favorite watering hole. They even hit me to some coffee. Y'all always show me mad love, man. Every time they see me, they be yelling out my name. Definitely. Shout out to the homie DJ Ike, who does Wu-Tang Wednesday over there. I appreciate you. This one goes out to my brother from another mother, my man, Billy Wheels, a.k.a. Will I Am. Because, man, back in the days, we used to talk about conspiracy theories all day, bruh. You know what I mean? And he don't fuck with them either, so I think that's really dope. Shout out to I was part of this book club back in the 90s, and we used to share all kinds of VHS tapes about the New World Order. I'm about to track some of them brothers down, man, and see how they doing, man. And then shout out to my barbershop, Distinguished Cuts, because I know I always go in there and bust holes in their conspiracy theories. Word is born.
It's all a game. It's all a game. It's all a game.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 64 of my Killer Tape back. Hope you enjoyed it. I know we deviated from how we usually get down. If you want to book me for discussions, panels, and workshops, send a shout out to my email, DanTresOmi@gmail. That's DanTresOmi. And make sure in the subject heading you put bookings. If you want to hit me up on the Twitters, you can hit the official Twitter for with my Killer Tape at, and it's Omi's Podcast, at Omi's Podcast, OMIS Podcast. But you can usually find me on mine at DanTresOmi, DanTresOmi. Word is born. You know where I'm at. And I see y'all and thank y'all for listening. And, talk to the babies about this kind of stuff. Word.